Hey guys, welcome back to my coverage of the 2018 Oscar predictions. I am down to my last two categories, and the category up for discussion today is Best Director. As always, before I get into the nitty gritty of this video, I will be doing a live tweet coverage of the Oscars on March 4th. So if you guys are planning to watch the Oscars this Sunday, be sure to catch me on Twitter. That's my Twitter addy on the screen right now. And yeah, I'll be nice and inebriated, giving my reactions to the winners. So yeah, add me if you like. If this is your first time watching me, this is how this video is going to go. I'm going to give you a list of nominees, followed by my initial thoughts and who I think got snubbed. And then I'm going to list the nominees' previous history with the Academy. And then I'm going to tell you who I want to win and give you some analysis. And then I'm going to tell you who I think is going to win and some analysis. So fasten your seatbelts, kids. It's time to talk about Best Director. And the nominees for the 2018 Best Director are Christopher Nolan for Dunkirk, Jordan Peele for Get Out, Greta Gerwig for Lady Bird, Paul Thomas Anderson for Phantom Thread, and Guillermo del Toro for The Shape of Water. So, my initial thoughts, snubs, and previous history with the Academy. So you only have to watch my reaction video to the Oscar nominations announcement to see how ecstatic I was about the nominees for direction this year. I was crossing all my fingers and praying that Christopher Nolan would get a nomination, and yes, he finally did! Praise Jesus! He finally did it! After being snubbed by the Academy for so long for previous masterpieces like The Dark Knight, Inception, and Interstellar, he finally got his first nomination for directing with Dunkirk. All I can say is, about bloody time. All it took for him to get noticed by the Academy was to make a war film. So yeah, it's kind of like Steven Spielberg back in the day. Both Greta Gerwig and Jordan Peele were wonderful additions to the selection this year. Both of them were seen as outsiders because they didn't get nominated for directing at the BAFTAs. But yeah, when they actually got nominated for Best Directing at the Oscars, yeah, it was a nice little surprise. It's so nice to see them included. And Guillermo del Toro I was so chuffed for as well because I absolutely loved his fantasy, fairy tale, The Shape of Water. The only person that wasn't that fussed to see in the list of nominees this year for Best Direction was Paul Thomas Anderson for Phantom Thread. I said in my review of Phantom Thread that I'm not the biggest fan of Paul Thomas Anderson. Don't hate me, just my personal preference. I thought Phantom Thread came out a little bit too late for it to be really considered for the big awards like Best Picture and Best Director. So yeah, for him to get nominated for Best Picture and Best Director was a bit of a surprise. But in the end, when I actually saw Phantom Thread, I didn't actually like it. So there are a bunch of other directors this year that I would have preferred that took his slot. And this brings me to my snubs. There were so many other directors this year that I would have loved to have seen honored more than Paul Thomas Anderson, and they include Steven Spielberg for The Post, Joe Wright for Darkest Hour, Sofia Coppola for The Beguiled, Martin McDonagh for 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, and Denis Villeneuve for Blade Runner 2049. But my top choice would definitely have been Luca Guadagnino for Call Me By Your Name, because Call Me By Your Name was the film that I was most moved by last year. But still, as a whole, this category this year is very strong. So nice to see Greta Gerwig in there. Her nomination makes her only the 5th woman in history to ever be nominated for Best Director, so congrats to her. And Jordan Peele is also only the 5th black man in history to ever be nominated for Best Director. But he's already made history this year because he managed to get nominated for Best Director, Best Picture, and Best Original Screenplay, all for his first feature film. So what an accomplishment that is already. Legend! And Guillermo del Toro is also following in the footsteps of his other Mexican director friends, Alfonso Cuarón and Alejandro G. Inarritu, who have both won for directing not too long ago. Plus, Pan's Labyrinth is one of my favorite movies, period. So yeah, I do have a real soft spot for Guillermo del Toro. So yeah, his inclusion means that we have another minority in the director category, which means that only 2 spots have been taken up by westernized white men this year, Christopher Nolan and Paul Thomas Anderson. So it's an incredibly diverse year this year, which makes me happy. Right, now let's have a look at the nominees' previous history with the Academy. It's an interesting selection. There's a lot of first-time nominees for direction, but many of the nominees have had previous nominations for other categories like Best Picture and Best Writing. This is Christopher Nolan's first time being nominated for direction with Dunkirk, and he's also up for Best Picture for this film. But he's also had 3 previous nominations with the Academy before. 1 for Best Picture for Inception, and 2 for Writing for Inception and Memento. And for Jordan Peele, this too is his first time being nominated for direction, but he's also up for 2 other awards this year, 1 for Best Original Screenplay and 1 for Best Picture, both for his film Get Out. Greta Gerwig is also a a first-time nominee for directing with her film Lady Bird, but she's also been nominated this year for Best Original Screenplay as well. Paul Thomas Anderson has been previously nominated once before for directing for There Will Be Blood back in 2008. This is his second time being nominated for direction for Phantom Thread, but he's also up for Best Picture for the same film. But he's also had quite a substantial track record with the Academy. He's had 4 previous nominations for writing for Inherent Vice, Magnolia, Boogie Nights, and There Will Be Blood. And he's also had a Best Picture nomination for There Will Be Blood. And surprisingly, he has never won an Academy Award. And finally, Guillermo del Toro. This is his first time being nominated for directing for The Shape of Water. He's also in the same boat as Jordan Peele this year, as he's also up for Best Original Screenplay and Best Picture. And Guillermo del Toro has previously been nominated once before for Best Original Screenplay for Pan's Labyrinth back in 2007. So the tradition with the Academy used to be that the film that ended up winning Best Picture would more often than not win for Best Director too. However, this hasn't always been the case, particularly in the last few years with the Academy. Last year, the Best Picture eventually went to Moonlight, but the Best Director was Damien Chazelle for La La Land. In 2016, the Best Film was Spotlight, but Best Director was Alejandro G. Inarritu for The Revenant. And in 2014, the Best Picture was 12 Years a Slave, but Best Director went to Alfonso Cuarón for Gravity. In exceptionally tough years, the Academy has been known to split Best Director and Best Picture, because it almost acts like a compromise, because that way more people get honoured in some way. And I'm almost certain that there is going to be an upset or a surprise in either the Best Picture or Best Director category this year. I'll be posting my Best Picture predictions shortly after I've done Best Director, so be sure to check that video out because these two videos are interrelated and they do bounce off each other. But yes, mark my words, I am certain there will be a surprise in either one of these categories, or maybe both. So, who do I want to win? Easy. Christopher Nolan, okay? I've been saying it ever since I saw Dunkirk back in July that, yeah, he is my favourite to win Best Director, and my opinion still hasn't changed. But of course, the other nominees do have credibility. I'm fortunate enough now to have seen all 9 of the Best Picture nominees this year, so I have seen all 5 of the directors' work that are nominated this year. There's plenty of praise to be given out for directing this year, but when you break it down, it really does come down to 2 people: Guillermo del Toro and Christopher Nolan. When I think of all 5 of the films that were nominated for Best Picture and Best Director, only Guillermo del Toro and Christopher Nolan stand out in my mind as outstanding direction. One is a war film and the other is a fantasy, but they both profoundly moved me when I watched them this year. Christopher Nolan and Guillermo del Toro are both masterful storytellers, and I will say this, I have such love for both of them that if either Guillermo del Toro or Christopher Nolan win, I will be extremely happy for them. But this is about who I want to win, and gun to my head, I still have to pick Christopher Nolan. Yes, I might be a little biased because he's British and he's like my favourite director ever, and I've been very verbal about his exclusion from previous Best Directing categories. But there's no denying that Christopher Nolan's passion for the craft is present in every frame of every film that he's ever directed. He's earned himself a reputation as the thinking man's blockbuster auteur, and now that he's finally been nominated for his 10th film, it feels like it's supposed to be his time. But frustratingly, Nolan has failed to win any of the big awards this year. He had no luck at the Golden Globes or the BAFTAs. And if Christopher Nolan can't win on his home turf for the BAFTA, then what chance does he have with the Academy in America? And that infuriates me, because if Nolan can't win for Dunkirk, then I honestly don't know what he has to do. Here is my opinion on why I think he's the most deserving. So if you look at the movie Dunkirk itself, it's not your typical war movie. Dunkirk is a retelling of the evacuation of 400,000 soldiers in World War II France, told from 3 different perspectives in time. So already, I can't think of another war film to compare this to. This film really doesn't have a central character because World War II wasn't just about one man. Like I said, 400,000 soldiers were on this beach. And Nolan really succeeds in making you think about these men as a collective, okay? What war does to the masses. Dunkirk is based on historical events, but it finds a different way to approach the story. Everybody was talking about this film when they saw it because it felt fresh, it was intellectual, but it was also accessible. So the story is based in truth, but it's executed with intelligence because of that Christopher Nolan non-linear structure. Having all these different time strands over and underlap each other and making it feel cohesive was not an easy task for him to do. And yet, he did it with precision. And Christopher Nolan never takes any shortcuts when it comes to telling the truth. And he will always shoot things practically rather than with CGI. Certain scenes of this film, like the Spitfire fights and the sinking ship, were all achieved with practical effects. When you think about what had to happen technically in order to achieve those shots, it involved having a knowledge of so many other elements, as well as having careful guidance in order to get it right, which he did. The attention to detail, the timing, the framing of these shots, the execution, it all just shows Christopher Nolan's prowess. He never sets the bar low. As a director, he's always challenging himself and upping the ante. So it's impossible not to respect him for taking a much more challenging practical route than going the easier CGI route. And also, another reason that Christopher Nolan stands out as Best Director is because Dunkirk is a film that has very little dialogue. So when you watch it, you aren't as invested in the acting as much as you are the directing. Because you're not swept up in a lot of dialogue, it forces you to watch, and then you can really see the film for Christopher Nolan's work. You can practically feel him guiding everybody from behind the camera when you watch this. So yeah, an admiration of the directing in Dunkirk is what the average person would have taken away when they first saw this film. Because the sheer grandness of what he pulled off is infallible. He demonstrates passion and skill to an expertise degree, and no other director in this year's nominees, in my opinion, has had more challenges and obstacles to overcome than Nolan, and yet he pulled it off. You can argue that Guillermo del Toro did pull off the same sort of cohesion with The Shape of Water, but I felt more immersed watching Dunkirk than I did The Shape of Water, which is why I want Christopher Nolan to win Best Director. But do I think Christopher Nolan will win? I'm so divided in my opinion this year for Best Director and Best Picture, and like I said, I'm 99% certain that there will be a surprise in either one of these categories, or maybe both, because the Academy have mixed things up this year with inclusions like Greta Gerwig and Jordan Peele up for directing. Despite them not getting any recognition for directing for the BAFTAs or the Golden Globes, it means it's less predictable than usual. These curveball nominations imply that the Academy is trying to shake things up, so the winner could reflect that idea. In regards to Jordan Peele and Greta Gerwig, I don't think either of them will win for directing, but that's just because their inclusion in this category was such a surprise, and I think that's a bit of a win by itself, and also I think they have a stronger chance of winning for writing. And if either of them did win for Best Director, it would be more of a statement win, and I just don't think that's going to happen this year. As for Paul Thomas Anderson, he is the only one of the 5 that I'm certain doesn't have a chance of winning. Despite his track record of having so many nominations and no previous wins, which implies, he's due for some recognition, I still don't think Phantom Thread has made enough noise for it to be really considered for Best Picture or Best Director. All evidence points to Guillermo del Toro being victorious this year. He's been sweeping all the awards this year with the BAFTAs and the Golden Globes, and he even took home the Directors Guild Award, and that's a very reliable precursor as to who's going to win the Oscar for Best Director. And there's no denying that The Shape of Water was one of the most cohesive films of the year. Every element works in tandem with each other. The music, the set design, the costumes, the makeup, the cinematography. It's the director's job to make sure all that stuff is glued together, and Guillermo del Toro did that. And we know when we're watching that we really are watching Guillermo del Toro's vision on the screen. It's like we've been given access to his mind's eye. And the 13 nominations that The Shape of Water received this year is proof that all the parts work together, and The Shape of Water really is a treasure to watch. And the Academy will want to award it, so it makes sense that Guillermo del Toro would win Best Director. It's just I can't shake the feeling of doubt that I'm having. It's so tough to pick a winner this year. It was tough for me. I'm sure it was just as much of a struggle for the Academy. And other factors just keep rattling around in my head, like, will the diversifying of the Academy membership have an impact? Will the Academy think that a war film based in history is more worthy than a fantasy film about a merman? Does Christopher Nolan's previous catalogue of work matter to the voters? Or will people vote politically, or with their hearts, or with their heads? As you can tell, it's a bloody jumble in my brain. It really is very difficult to call. But I'm saying that the 2018 Oscar for the Best Director will go to Guillermo del Toro for The Shape of Water. I'm basically picking this based on statistics because Guillermo del Toro has triumphed over award season. Particularly with the Directors Guild Award, I think he is going to win. Also, Dunkirk came out in July, whereas The Shape of Water came out in December, meaning that it's more fresh in the Academy's minds. And you know that expression, out of sight, out of mind? Well, Dunkirk was a summer blockbuster. So yeah, odds are people have moved on from it by now. Although, if Christopher Nolan does pull off a win here, I am going to be so pissed off with myself, because this will be an instance where I went with statistics rather than my gut feeling. And you should always trust your gut. But yes, I'm still thinking it will be Guillermo del Toro to win this. So yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see. So there you have it, guys. My prediction for the 2018 Best Director. This is an exceptionally tough one, so I'm sure lots of people have different opinions. But yeah, be sure to let me know who you think is going to win Best Director, and also who you think should win Best Director. And was there anybody that didn't make it into the category that you really wanted to see, like I was for Luca Guadagnino? Is anybody else really crushing hard for Christopher Nolan to win this, or is it just me? Whatever you think, please do let me know in the comments section below. And remember to follow me on Twitter if you guys are planning to watch the Oscars. It would be nice to chat to some of you whilst it's happening, and share the experience with others who have just as much love as I do. And stay tuned for my final prediction vid. It's a big one. Best Picture. Ah! That is another toughie. Be sure to click that subscribe button so you don't miss it. As always, thanks so much for watching, guys. For more things related to movies, TV, and popcorn culture, I'm Luke Airfield, and I'll see you next time.